just say I'm excited to have all of you here today to join us for the launch of Marco's new partnership with a global leader in cybersecurity, Arctic Wolf, who's going to, through this partnership, provide us, new opportunities for our customers in areas of 24/7 security monitoring, around risk management and identification capabilities, incident response and digital forensics, and of course in the area of cyber insurance as well. So it's an exciting new partnership for us, and it's of sorts a new era for us in the world of cybersecurity at Marco Technologies. Joining us here today is Tim DeWard, Regional VP of Sales Engineering at Arctic Wolf. He'll be helping us get through our discussion today on just some of the trends that he's seeing in the cyber insurance industry and the things that we should be prepared for. I'm the general manager of security for Marco Technologies. I oversee our security practice, including NOC, SOC, and consulting services. And then joining me here as well is Charles Brandt, our consulting services manager from the Marco team. So glad to be here, everybody. So with this new partnership, essentially this is going to enable us to have one collaborative security team. And I have really two logos up there, being Marco and Arctic Wolf, but really it's three. So when we talk about one collaborative security team, it's really between Marco, Arctic Wolf, and you as the customer, because as we go through this, there's a lot of things we're going to talk to. Basically, just mention how this is a team sport when it comes to cybersecurity. It really takes our partners, it takes our customers, it takes everyone that provides the input into this to essentially get to a security outcome that helps us reduce risk and avoid incidents in the first place. So through this new partnership, we're going to be able to provide comprehensive monitoring detection holistically and cost effectively, monitoring basically every area of your cybersecurity infrastructure and stack to be able to proactively identify threats and contain those threats as they do come up. Now, when things do occur, because incidents do inevitably occur, this is going to allow us to work with Arctic Wolf to provide digital forensics and incident response services end to end. So if things do come up, we can align you with the right resources with the Arctic Wolf team, the right resources from the Marco team to assist in any kind of remediation activities that need to go on as well. And it's a true partnership from that aspect of things. Charles, you want to chime in on some of the vCISO ongoing risk management activities and things like that?
Yeah, absolutely, Ben. The incident response capabilities are definitely huge in an offering like this. The platform that Arctic Wolf has built. But I think, before anything ever even happens in the environment, my team, we have vCISOs that are working with companies across many different industries. And, one of the things that we see again and again is preparation before an incident ever occurs is really paramount to getting through it with as minimum impact as possible, right? So what can we do as a company to prepare for that? Work with a tool like this, a vCISO, like somebody like on my team, where we're actually going through and conducting regular security posture reviews, right? Finding those gaps where they might occur, and then sorting them by severity and criticality, building out your roadmap, right, to make sure that you're kind of moving along with your security program. And these platforms that we have access to uh, really allow us to kind of measure where we can focus our time, right? How can we move the security program for that company forward as fast as possible? And also, our vCISOs can jump in there and make proactive recommendations based on what they're finding, because they're going to have the ability to see the data that's being captured and aggregated and unified underneath a platform like Arctic Wolf has provided here.
Awesome. Thanks, Charles. So one thing I think is important to cover is to look at things from an incident response lifecycle perspective. So on the screen, you see that kind of laid out here. Typically, it's in 4 phases. I break it out into 5 just for the sake of conversation. But I think a little bit of context here is that if we were to look back 5 or maybe 6 or 7 years ago, in my time during financial services when I was working in internal IT in a bank, is that they oftentimes said, no matter what, every time something comes up, if you think you have a potential incident, contact your cyber insurance first, which is a great thought and well intentioned in practice. But what we have gravitated toward now is we need to be as fast as possible, and we need to have the right resources aligned up in each of those phases of the incident response lifecycle. So things have shifted a little bit. But in this partnership, what we'll be able to do is essentially help our customers prepare for an incident through things like incident response planning, tabletop exercises to validate the effectiveness of that plan, but also identify risks and close those holes proactively before they can be exploited. Secondly, on here is detection and analysis. Arctic Wolf's platform, they're able to ingest from anything across endpoint, network, cloud, user behavior activity, and other facets to look at things holistically, identify those suspicious alerts, and then really narrow down to the things that actually matter. And then when something does come up, they can take first pass containment 24/7 to say, hey, based on the plan and the action plan we've laid out, we'll take this action to isolate users and devices where necessary based on that plan so that things don't spread too far. And then escalating to us at Marco where applicable based on that plan to assist with any further remediation that might be required in concert with Arctic Wolf. And then eradicating and recovering that threat, but also on the end of that, most importantly, making sure that we review what actually happened and then getting better from it, right? The best part of a true response plan is making sure we identify those holes that were exploited and then put in solutions to ensure they're not exploited again. So good overall look at that response lifecycle. Overall, Charles, I'd like you to kind of jump in here on the this piece here.
Yeah, absolutely. For those of you who aren't really familiar with the NIST cybersecurity framework, sometimes you hear this called NIST CSF, right? It's a pretty simple diagram of the overall life cycle of a security program and moving into what happens during an incident as well, right? So, the five core pillars are lined up there. We really need to identify what we have in our environment. And then after we have everything documented and kind of identified, we can understand how we're protecting it, right? How are we protecting those assets in our environment, whether they be devices or actually user accounts or anything related to your network infrastructure. And then if that day should come, right, we call that boom, right? That's boom's what you don't want to think about, right? It's kind of what keeps you up at night. Ransomware, affecting your servers, or all of a sudden a giant amount of data exfiltrating from your environment, right? We don't want to see any of that. But if that is to occur, right, how quickly can we actually detect it? We've seen time and again that the ability to detect something and get on it and contain it as quickly as possible really does significantly reduce the overall impact to an organization. So move from detect, respond as quickly as possible, and then enter into that recovery phase. So on the left, you see kind of left of boom, that identify and protect, and then right of boom, that incident response lifecycle. Overarching all of this in the newest update of NIST CSF 2.0 is the governance aspect of these things as well. And with a platform and tool set like Arctic Wolf has developed, right? We can get really up to date information on the overall vulnerabilities that may exist left of boom before something ever does occur. Right? We want to make sure that we're proactively remediating those and closing up those gaps, replacing those systems that maybe need to be updated, right? If that day should come, right, there's that 24/7 aspect that Ben had mentioned earlier, having the right people with the right tool sets to get on top of that and contain it as quickly as possible, and in many cases using some automation as well in that process. So kind of overall, as we look through the remainder of these slides, keep this in mind, and you can really see how, there's a lot that comes before an incident ever occurs. And then again, once that day does happen, if it ever happens, hopefully it doesn't, what can we do about it and move through that to reduce that impact overall to the company?
Awesome. I'll turn it over to you, Tim.
Awesome. Very good. Well, again, welcome everybody to the webinar. Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Charles. Charles, I want to take what you were just talking about, and I actually want to double down on it here. So at Arctic Wolf, our company mission is to help you, empower you, and enable you to end cyber risk. That's our mission statement. And it's a rather lofty goal. But where it relates to what Charles was just talking about, if we were to kind of shift the language a little bit to the topic of insurability, which is the main topic, of course, of this webinar, we want to talk about risk, because when we talk about carriers and brokers through which you purchase cyber insurance or potentially purchase cyber insurance, they're going to talk a lot about risk. They're going to talk a lot about kind of technical risk that exists in your environment, and then they're going to translate that risk to a business risk or a business impact. And so before we go any farther in the presentation, I want to talk about a definition of cyber risk. So we have a common vernacular here that we're going to use throughout the presentation. And it really is very much what Ben and Charles were just talking about in the context of the NIST framework. But a really, really simple definition is this. It's the likelihood of an incident occurring in your environment combined with the impact of an incident. Right? So what's the likelihood that I face of ransomware? What's the likelihood that I face of business email compromise? What's the likelihood that I face of data exfiltration? And then if that is to occur, what is the impact of it? How widespread, how broad is it, or how contained is it? And this, at the end of the day, is how we define cyber risk. And as I mentioned, our company mission is to end cyber risk and help you and empower you to end cyber risk. So we're going to talk a lot about risk mitigation, risk measurement, risk impact throughout this presentation. So let's talk about the risk that exists in the industry. And this isn't, the chart itself isn't too laden with data and a lot of facts and figures. This is really just a summary. But one of the things that we're seeing in the industry over the past kind of 5, 6, 7 years or so is, unfortunately, the gap between investment in tooling and the actual outcome that we're trying to achieve isn't closing. And a lot of data that we've been able to track and trace, it's unfortunately getting wider. Losses are getting bigger. That's essentially how we're defining on this slide, despite the fact that investments into cybersecurity and insurance and things of that nature are actually increasing as well. The effectiveness isn't closing. So it's good that we're investing in this. It's good that we're paying attention to this, but we got to figure out why our investments are not paying off. So why are investments not paying off? Why is this so hard to solve? Now, I've been privileged and fortunate to sit in rooms with a variety of customers, of which roughly half of which were IT people, and roughly half of which were, I'll simply say, business people. So COOs, CEOs, CFOs, business line managers, etc. And I found what I'm about to show you to be fairly effective in terms of explaining the core problem. So I'm actually going to be talking to more of the business people. So if there's any kind of business people on this webinar right now, I'm talking to you. Now, the IT people certainly listen in as well. My guess is you're probably going to be nodding in agreement, but I want to help you understand why, from a technical perspective, this gap is so hard to close. What is the core problem? Now, I'm going to give you an illustration of a customer environment. And Arctic Wolf today has over 10,000 customers. And what I'm about to show you scales linearly, regardless of how big or how small you are. as a company. Now, for this example, I'm going to use an example of a company that is roughly 500 employees or 500 users on a network. And you see across the left-hand side here, you've got users and identity access management systems and cloud instances and applications and servers and network and endpoints and all kinds of stuff. And all this stuff was built to make your business run and run effectively and run efficiently. And an organization that has roughly 500 employees might have around 100 physical and virtual servers and different cloud instances and on-prem and things of that nature. Now, again, take everything I'm about to show you. If you are a 50 employee company, you can divide everything by 10. If you're 5,000 employees, you can take everything I'm about to show you and multiply times 10. Again, this scales linearly, but this is why the problem is so complicated. On any given day in your business, your employees are coming to work physically or virtually, and they're logging into these systems and they're doing business activity. And on any given day and any given week, 100% of this is probably all good stuff. And all this activity is being logged in all these different logs across all these different systems. And if you are roughly 500 employee company, on a weekly basis, you're going to generate approximately 16.5 million security observations. Now, again, if you're a tenth this size, divide by 10. If you're 10 times this size, multiply these numbers by 10. And so the real challenge is if a threat actor is able to get into your environment, they know, most threat actors understand what you are monitoring for, because nobody has the time, if they're a 500 employee company, to dig through 16.5 million security observations every week and determine, is this good? Is this good? Is this good? Is this potentially bad? And that is what we refer to, if we continue down this funnel here, that is what we refer to as the 76 weekly investigations. On a given week of a company of roughly this size, someone within the organization should be doing 75 to 80 investigations to determine, hey, is this thing that's not quite been seen before in this way, is that a good thing? Maybe it's an employee that got a promotion and now they're accessing new data, new systems. That's a good thing. But what if it's someone that appears to be an employee, it's a nefarious actor or threat actor, somehow got credentials into my environment and now they're accessing information that they should not be accessing? And doing that investigation to determine, is this good behavior? Is this potentially bad behavior? And again, as you multiply these numbers for the size of organization, it just gets more and more complex. At the core root of a lot of what we're seeing from this effectiveness gap, it all comes down to this. It's having not only the tooling, but the tooling that's creating the alerts and logging these observations and being able to comb through all of that and figure out, is this real and is this not real? This is the core problem that we see in the industry. Now, I'm going to skip ahead. How does Arctic Wolf solve all this without going into a great amount of detail? Essentially, we sit in the middle of all this. All of those logs come to us in our platform. All of our people do those investigations for you on your behalf. We assign to a concierge security team that really helps you achieve what you're ultimately after. The ultimate outcomes on the far right-hand side, which is, first of all, I just want to be safe. I just want to be protected. I just want to know that somebody is 24/7 looking after my environment and determining and doing these investigations and making sure that they're containing anything that does look nefarious or actually is nefarious. And I want rapid detection, and I want to be able to collaborate with experts who are truly experts in this space. I want to make sure I'm following best practices like the NIST framework. And I want some reporting to show back to my management, my leadership, that I'm doing a good job. That's what most customers at the end of the day are ultimately after. And they really don't want to deal with that stuff in the middle. That's the really hard, messy stuff. And that's the stuff that we are doing on behalf of our customers. Now, if these things are done well, I want to kind of show another funnel slide here. If these things are done well, and I had a bunch of technical things in the previous slide, and now I want to talk about this from a risk perspective. Now here, the risk that you see on the left-hand side is really things like, what is my propensity or risk factor for business email compromise based on my organizational size, but also the industry that I'm in, the data that I have, the customer base that I have. Because we do incident response services and forensics, because we work with a lot of insurance companies, because we have 5 to 10,000 customers that we monitor actively 24/7, we have a really good understanding of what your risk profile looks like. And by the way, so does, or at least your insurance companies, brokers, and carriers are attempting to evaluate your risk and then assign a dollar value to that. And we'll come back to that concept here towards the end of the presentation. But how Arctic Wolf helps solve for this is we look at the risks that your organization faces, and through the services that we provide and deliver, you can see some of these here kind of in the middle left. So our cyber resiliency assessment, our managed security awareness, our vulnerability management or managed risk service. These proactive security measures that we offer can reduce the frequency of attacks in your environment by upwards of 90%. Now, that is a very material reduction to which your insurance broker and carrier care very, very much about. And you should care very much about as well. In fact, more than the rest of us, quite frankly. Now, as we continue down this funnel, we have additional services, and this is what Charles was talking about and Ben were talking about in terms of detection, rapid detection. If we can rapidly detect something before a threat actor can do any significant damage within your environment, we can reduce the severity of those events by upwards of 90%, in some cases much higher as well. And so going back to when we talk about ending cyber risk, remember I talked about the frequency and the impact. That's what we see illustrated here in this slide. And then as we continue down this, we collectively will never be perfect. The only way to be perfect is to shut down all your servers and disconnect everything from the internet and go back to paper. But that is not a sound business practice. So then there's always a little bit of additional risk that exists. And that's where we look at transferring, or you as an organization look at transferring that risk to another organization, either in the form of security operations warranty, which is something that we offer, or cyber insurance, which leads me to the next slide. To truly end cyber risk, I want you to view this slide as a formula. And I've sat down with a number of brokers and carriers and discussed this very concept right here. And the concept on this slide is 80 to 90% of the risk that your organization faces can and should be mitigated by you. Now, how do you do that? It's a combination of the two things that you see here on the slide, which is risk assessment, purpose-built technology and tooling. It is talent. And then wrapped around all of this is good process. And this is a large part of what Arctic Wolf and Marco can help you solve for, which is how do you make sure that you have the right technology? But how do you make sure you have the right processes and 24/7 monitoring wrapped around that to make sure that not only is alerting happening or is it being logged, but somebody with expertise is looking at it and knows how to interpret it. That is the risk mitigation portion. And again, we can only do so much, and then there becomes a diminishing return. And then the remainder is something that we transfer to an insurance company. And that should really be more in the range of 10 to 20% of your risk should be transferred. Now, if we go back 5 years or so in this industry, and we're going to get some slides here in just a second that illustrate this, this was all out of whack. Many of you didn't have enough tooling in place. You didn't have people that were focused on cybersecurity, and we saw attacks skyrocket for a period of time. And insurance was carrying too much of that load, too much of that risk, unintentionally. And so what happened was, carriers started taking significant losses. And then what happened is prices increased in terms of premiums, coverages reduced, and mandates for controls came into play over the last 5 years to bring that back into control. And so I want to illustrate that for you now on this next slide. So what I'm about to show you, this is actually not my data, and this is not actually Arctic Wolf data. Although we agree with it, this is information that I got from a handful of national brokers. I've got 3 different slides. I'm only going to show you one because they're all identical. So I had 3 national cyber insurance brokers share this information with me, and I want to show it to you right now, which is this is the cyber insurance pricing trends really over the last kind of 5 years or so. And there's a lot of data and a lot of information on this slide, and I don't want you to focus on that. What I want you to focus on is the general shape of the lines. And you can even ignore the 50th and the 75th percentile because they roughly mirror each other. But what you see on the far left-hand side is essentially, if I were to interpret this for you, is essentially lower premiums. And then what happened, as we just talked about, is insurance premiums spiked. And the reason that they started to spike is because of ransomware attacks and business email compromise. So let me highlight a couple for you. Now, what I'm going to highlight here are kind of the big things that you saw in the news, the Wall Street Journal, Forbes magazine, 60 Minutes, CBS News, whatever it happens to be. But we had major events such as SolarWinds and the Microsoft Exchange vulnerabilities and the Facebook breaches and JBS Foods and Colonial Pipelines and the Kaseya attack and Log4j, on and on. Now, what's not represented here are really the tens of thousands of ransomware cases, data exfiltration, business email compromise that happened in the same window of time. And then, as you can see, then prices spiked. And then what happened is carriers, those that were actually writing your insurance policies, were taking significant losses, massive losses. You were paying them $10,000 in premiums or something like that, and they were paying out $6.5 million or more in losses. Some of the big flagship cases where $1.5 billion were paid out to pharmaceutical companies and shipping companies. You can read about those like Maersk and Merck Pharmaceutical as a few examples of that. And of course, obviously, we saw a spike in, again, prices, and this isn't even covering things like reductions in coverage, deductibles that went up, and then, of course, ultimately the introduction of, and I'll build this out, controls that are now mandated as part of an insurance policy. But I want to go backwards here just for a second, because another question that we get asked often is on the far right-hand side, where do we see prices going? Now, again, this isn't my opinion. This isn't necessarily Arctic Wolf's opinion. This is the information that brokers have shared with me. We're kind of actually, we've continued to decline a little bit. So if I were to put a couple more data points on here, you would see small continued downward trends. The expectation over this next 6 to 12 months is prices may stabilize, maybe even creep up. And again, this is referring to premiums, but no more than 10%. Where that could be offset, though, is there is now a return because things are coming back down in terms of effectiveness around containing these threats and losses for the insurance companies. Capital is coming back into this market, which is basically a good thing. That'll actually help compress prices over time. But if we see attacks either spike up again or continue to rise, and there's a new form of attack that maybe we haven't anticipated yet, of course, we could see prices continue to climb back up again as well. So nobody knows the future, of course, but those are kind of the prediction models that I've seen and heard from different brokers. So hopefully
something in here, Tim. It's an interesting thing to call out when you mentioned earlier the understanding why it's so hard for the technology people in the room to address this problem. For those sitting on the business side of it, if we look at these specific incidents that are listed here, these are all like marquee events that happen in the cybersecurity industry in the past several years, right? The Colonial Pipeline jumps out at me specifically. And the reason being is that the initial attack vector was one user account that was dormant, that got missed, wasn't disabled, was lacking multi-factor authentication. One user, that's how they got in. So when we look at this and we talk about where the industry is going and how we accomplish this, it is moving away from that tools-based mindset. Those tools are necessary, that purpose-built technology is necessary, but the operational aspect is so important because those things are going to happen, and we should expect that failure to happen because humans aren't perfect. There is no perfect solution for it, but we should be able to operationalize some of these things.
Absolutely. And Ben, to that point, and that's a great point, in our incident response cases, so these are generally non-Arctic Wolf customers that have had some kind of breach, So they reach out to their insurance carrier, the carrier partners them up with our incident response team, and we go in and we do forensics, and we basically do root cause analysis, recovery, and things of that nature. And we'll talk about that here in a little bit. But where I want to tie it into Ben's point is the vast majority of time, we're able to find root cause. And the reason we're able to find root cause is because there is a breadcrumb trail. It was being logged in multiple places at really, really low levels. And so the point there is a lot of the stuff is logged and can be seen if you have the right operational controls and processes and people looking at those things. And you can actually contain it, detect it, and contain it very, very early in the process. And so that's one of the things I want you to understand is this is possible to solve through some of the technology we have. And we're going to talk about that here in a couple of slides. Now, this is a slide that, by the way, this is a slide that I regularly get asked, can I have a copy of this? And the short answer is yes. So screen capture it right now if you want. Otherwise, we would be happy to send this slide to you as a follow-up. And what this is these are the top 12 cyber insurance company controls that they are either mandating or strongly recommending just to get a policy, right? Not necessarily to bring down your prices and increase your coverage and make you more insurable. So top left as a perfect example. Most companies now, if you don't have MFA properly deployed, not just purchased, but properly deployed in your environment, you can't even get an insurance policy at any dollar amount. They'll just turn you down, they'll decline you. So that's a really, really good example. So if you don't, my guess is if you have cyber insurance, you have some of these things that are demanded of you already, which means a lot of the ones that are on this slide that maybe aren't mandated of you yet will be. So we're seeing different industries where different things are actually becoming more and more mandated here just to get a policy. Now, the orange bubbles that you see here, this is either how Arctic Wolf either solves for this completely, or we help monitor and strengthen and support that particular control. So for example, Arctic Wolf does not create and sell MFA solutions, but we actively 24/7 monitor them, and we look for risks and vulnerabilities, and we help educate our customers on how they can improve their implementation of MFA. So that's just a simple example of that. And I realize my slide is outdated because under secure endpoints in the second column, second one down, we actually now completely fulfill that requirement. So that should be a full orange bubble now. And I need to update my slides. Now, you put all these in place, and one of the things that customers have been telling us is you put Arctic Wolf services in place through a partner like Marco. And what IT executives are telling us as they're working with CFOs and COOs within their organization is by having our services in place, a lot of times this is yielding a 25% reduction in premiums with their insurance carrier. Now, you have to have our services in place. You need to sit down with your broker and or make sure your underwriter understands what our services are, what our capabilities are. We can help with that. By the way, we are on the panel of over 30 insurance carriers already, which means they already know the value that we provide, and they provide favorable policies as a result of that, assuming that you have the services live already. If you have an insurance carrier that maybe we're not on panel with, chances are we've worked with them before in the past and we already have a good working relationship with them. And we can actually help put letters of understanding in place on your behalf between your broker and your carrier to help realize some of these types of savings and benefits as well. Okay, how do we do this? So we talked about why earlier. Now we want to talk about how does Arctic Wolf help reduce your risk? How does Arctic Wolf help reduce your premiums in some cases, or maybe a better way to say that is to improve your insurability? So it may not be a premium reduction, but it might be a coverage improvement or reduction in deductibles that you may choose over savings on premiums. But let's talk about the how we do this. So at the end of the day, so I had a funnel slide earlier where I talked about if you were a 500 employee company all your cloud instances and your endpoint, your network, and your identity access management systems. That was on the left-hand side. And all that stuff is creating logs and generating observations. Well, here I've now turned that slide to a degree. And now all of your endpoints and network and cloud and people and apps are at the bottom. And they are generating observations and telemetry. And so how we implement within your environment is we simply take all of those logs from all of those systems or the APIs into those instances like cloud applications, for example, and we feed that data into our Aurora platform. Now, this is a cloud-based instance that we manage, we maintain. There's nothing for you to do to build it out or update it or anything like that. We take care of that for you. You simply point those log sources to us and we help you during the onboarding process to help configure that. It's really, really simple to do. Once your logs are streaming into our platform, there's a lot of things that we're doing behind the scenes. One is our tremendous amount of detections that we have built. We, of course, have what we refer to as Alpha AI, which is a combination of artificial intelligence and machine learning that is looking through all this log information across our now 10,000 customers. I say now, by the way, we just recently made an acquisition of a company for an endpoint or an EDR tool, which we'll talk about here in a second, that nearly doubled our customer base. Now, why this is important, why it's important that we have a lot of customers and a lot of data in this platform is as you're training machine learning and artificial intelligence tooling, having a bigger, broader data set is better and is more advantageous. The more data you have to train your models, the higher the efficacy of those models. And so the bigger the platform and the more data that there is that's being ingested, the better the models are at refining their capabilities. Now, how we deliver our services back to you is on top here. Everything is delivered through what we call a concierge delivery model. And that means that all of our customers are assigned a concierge team who they get to know by name and they get to interact with on a regular basis to help put them on a security journey, which is what you see on the kind of the top right-hand side here. So we help determine where are you at today from a security maturity perspective relative to things like CIS controls and this framework. And then, okay, let's go on a security journey together to improve your security posture and reduce your risk. Now, on top of that, there are a handful of services that essentially you purchase and acquire to get access to all of this tooling, this technology, these people in this process. So as I alluded to just a moment ago, one is endpoint security. So like an EDR tool is now a net new offering that we have just within the last couple of weeks. Managed detection response is essentially 24/7 monitoring of your environment by our people, our tools, our platform, and our expertise to rapidly detect things, but also help put you on a security journey. Managed risk that you see here in the middle is our vulnerability management. So we provide guided remediation around vulnerability management, taking a lot of that burden off of you. So rather than just having a list of 500 to 1,000 vulnerabilities, we will consult with you in the context of your network, your industry, on what the best practices are to go quickly address the most important vulnerabilities to your particular business. And then from there, we have managed security awareness training where we develop content around training your employees and your contractors. We deploy that content because people are becoming the fastest growing attack surface in our customers' environment and the biggest vulnerability. Threat actors are finding that your employees are the fastest way to circumvent all of your processes and procedures. And then finally, hopefully you never need this, but we do offer incident response services, forensics, expert witness, data recovery services, should something bad actually occur in your environment. So this is, in a nutshell, the how of how we deliver these capabilities, these outcomes. Most importantly,
if I could interject on one thing there, I think one thing to call out is important for a lot of our, I know we've got some customers on the call as well, as far as, endpoint security, that's one area, Arctic Wolf has that offering. One thing to note in this is that the platform is built to be vendor agnostic too. So for those customers already running CrowdStrike, because we have a lot of our customers running CrowdStrike or Microsoft Defender, we're still able to provide that same outcome because they keep it as open as possible. Again, To your point, Tim, about having as much data and visibility as possible to really train that AI and machine learning, that's another benefit is just having those integrations with your entire tech stack.
Ben, that was perfect timing. Look at that. That was the bullet I was going to cover here on the bottom left-hand side.
Oh, I beat you to it, I guess.
No, that's perfect. I'm glad you did. That's fantastic. Yeah. The point here, as Ben mentioned, is we don't care what tooling you have today. Whichever firewall vendor you have today, we'll work with that. Whatever endpoint tool that you have today, we will work with that and we'll integrate with that. Whatever cloud instance you have today, we will work with that and we'll integrate with that. So it's an open platform, I guess, is ultimately what we're trying to say, which is you can choose the EDR tool or the firewall tool or the identity access management tool that is best for your business. And we will integrate with that. And if you decide to change that at a point down the road, that is entirely up to you. You should do what is right for your organization, and we will integrate with that. That's one of the things that makes us incredibly unique. So while we do have an endpoint tool that we now offer as of 2-3 weeks ago, if you want to stay with whatever tooling that you have today, that is fantastic. We will bring that into our platform and deliver the same level of service and outcome, which leads to the second bullet here. We really do focus on outcomes as opposed to how can we get you more alerts or fewer alerts, or how can we customize this report? Do we do all of that stuff? Yes. But those things in of themselves are not the outcome. The outcome at the end of the day is protecting the business, right? As I talk to CFOs as an example and people in finance, it's balance sheet protection, because cyber risk at the end of the day, while it's technical in terms of how it manifests itself, the ultimate impact of the business at the end of the day is a threat to your balance sheet, shutting down operations so that revenue can't come in, driving up costs, those types of things. And so we're really focused on how do we make sure we deliver a business outcome that is impactful to you. We talked a little bit about scale and breadth of our solution already and the advantages of that. Now, I do want to shift over and talk a little bit about incident response and incident response retainers. Now, going back to that slide that Ben and Charles talked about, kind of that right of boom. If you are not an Arctic Wolf customer today, and you do unfortunately get hit with a significant event, or you want to prepare for that if it does happen. Another example of this is a lot of insurance carriers are now starting to say, you better have an incident response plan. And oh, by the way, I want to see it, and it better be more than a paragraph or a page. So traditional incident response retainers have not delivered well. Customers have been upset with them for a variety of reasons, 3 of which are identified here on this slide. Customers didn't like the large upfront costs. They didn't like the multi-hour response time. They didn't like that there was no planning assistance. It was just, hey, when there's an emergency, call us and then we'll figure things out. And so we attempted to solve all of that with what we refer to as incident response jumpstart retainer. The key highlights of this and what makes it unique is we do have a 1 hour or less. Our average response time is about 15 minutes. But we do have a 1 hour response time SLA if you call us or reach out to us in the event of an emergency. We do have a carrier, cyber insurance carrier approved IR team. I talked about the fact that we're on 30 carrier panels already. And we worked with nearly every insurance company out there. But we also provide you proactive planning resources and capabilities as well to help you build out a proper incident response plan. And then Ben or Charles, do you want to talk a little bit about maybe some tabletop stuff that you guys do that just further enhances this capability as well?
Yeah, I can jump in and take that one. One of the things that we've seen again and again in our vCISO consulting advisory services is running through with different stakeholders in the organizations incidents that might affect the company, right? To really kind of walk through some of those run books or walk through how you're going to bring in outside or legal counsel or maybe in-house in some cases, right? To Tim's point, you're going to want to go through some of these exercises ahead of time to understand what are the potential operational consequences of these systems going down, and they're not all going to be equal, right? Finding the system that's going to potentially hurt the most should it be impacted, the reputational impact, right? How are you going to communicate this to internal employees versus external stakeholders and customers? Some of the things are a little bit less technical, but very, very much kind of overlap with these IR run books and resources and tools such that you're going to be using. So we work with customers all the time where we're bringing in the executive leadership side of the house, as well as the technical, and just running through it, running through what happens if you get that business email compromise, right? That MFA bypass on your VPN, the data exfiltration, the ransomware, right? Those common things that we see again and again, our security operations center hitting customers. And how can we make sure that everybody knows what their role and expectation is during an incident? Because we've seen that really helps people move through those quicker and with less pain, right? So that IR plan or incident response plan, great start. The run books really help move through those particular incidents that come up again and again quicker. But tabletop, or basically just a scenario, walking through that scenario really helps teams work more cohesively and have a better understanding of what their part is. If they get that call at maybe a weekend or whatever, that in a time it's not convenient to jump into an incident at the last minute, right? So we definitely run through those quite a bit with customers and find it pretty valuable.
Absolutely. Thank you, Charles. So why trust? Obviously, there's some great reasons why to engage Marco in those services. To tie it off, like why trust Arctic Wolf for incident response services? Well, we talked about this already. Approved on over 30 insurance carrier panels already. We actually have one of our services that we provide as part of incident response, which is a really important service, is should you get hit, for example, with some form of ransomware or data exfiltration. Part of the service that we provide is threat actor negotiation. So we actually have a team of people that is experienced and skilled with actually having negotiation conversations on behalf of our customers with the threat actors. Part of what we do is we understand what their tactics and techniques are, what their capabilities are. We can have a pretty good understanding of when they're lying. Hey, we can do this. And we know that threat actor really probably can't do that. They don't have those capabilities. We can call their bluff, so to speak. And so we have, on average, reduced ransom demands by upwards of 92%. In many cases, I heard of one instance where we actually reduced the ransom demands down to $0. That's a kind of a unique special case that we don't have time to go into now. But that was a kind of an interesting one as well. And then 15% faster recovery than industry average. The other stat that I mentioned earlier, I think I mentioned or alluded to earlier, which is 87 to 90% of the time we can find root cause analysis. You care about that. You want to know how it initially happened, but your carrier, your insurance carrier, really wants to know. And a lot of times they won't let you proceed too far in the recovery process until we get a better understanding of that as well. So that becomes really, really important. And last but not least, the customers have unfortunately gone through incident response with us have a very, very favorable rating of our service as a result. Okay, I'm going to move to the second to the last slide here that I want to talk about. And in the interest of time, I'm going to kind of skip through a lot of this. But I do want to talk about, as Arctic Wolf takes you on a security journey, I do want to talk about ways in which you can measure your risk profile, how you can measure and map out how you create or how you reduce, I should say, that effectiveness gap. If you remember back to slide, I think it was 2, where I talked about the effectiveness gap, how we can kind of measure the actions that we are taking in our environment and show back to the business how that's actually improving your outcome. This has been one of the biggest gaps in the entire cybersecurity industry, in my humble opinion, which is how do we show back to the business that we're actually making improvements. And so included in our services, this is not an additional thing that you buy, it's just included with our service, is something that we call CRA, or Cyber Resilience Assessment. And I want you to think about this a little bit like we're kind of in tax season right now. And if any of you have used TurboTax or something like that before in the past, TurboTax will guide you through the process of your tax preparation by asking a series of questions. So it'll ask you things like, are you married? Do you have children? Do you own a house? Are you employed? Are you full-time employed? What's your income? And from there, it helps create a tax assessment of you. And then, of course, obviously apply that to tax regulations. Very, very similarly, what CRA does is we can ask you a series of kind of prompted questions, and we can do some analysis as well through this on our own, where we're pulling in information, and we can create an assessment of your environment. And we do this not only based on Arctic Wolf best practices, but probably just as, or maybe even more importantly, we can pivot that and say, okay, relative to NIST framework, how do I stack up against what NIST recommends? And what is my score relative to NIST? Or in this example, you see on the very top of that bar that says CIS 452, relative to CIS controls. What is my ranking based on what I have implemented? And then what are the things that I can go do to improve my score against CIS, against NIST? In other words, if I go out and acquire a PAM and implement a PAM solution, you can do some what if scenarios here, where you can go into this tool right here and say, okay, if I go out and acquire a PAM solution and implement that, how does that change my scoring and my vulnerabilities relative to how NIST framework looks at this? And then ultimately, down in the bottom right-hand corner, you see something called an insurability rating. The other thing that we've done as part of this tooling is we've sat down with brokers and carriers and said, when you do your risk assessment of customers, what are the things that you care about and how do you actualize that? And how do you build that into a formula? And they shared a lot of that information with us. And so we built that into a tool where we can also give you an insurability rating. And again, you can still do what if analysis here to say, if I implement these controls, how does that improve my insurability rating? And so the really brilliant part about this is if you have cyber insurance today, if you've had cyber insurance before in the past, a lot of times an underwriter goes through this assessment and establishes a risk profile of your environment. And then they say, here's your coverage, here's your deductible, here's your premium. And to a large degree, you kind of take it or leave it. And so this now gives you some information to say, okay, now I know how they're getting there and I understand the key markers that they're looking for. And so you become a more educated consumer of cyber insurance. And the real beauty of this is you can actually download this into a PDF. And you can actually take this insurability rating, you can hand it to your broker and say, Mr. and Mrs. Broker, here are the improvements I've made over time, over the last year. How does this help me as we look at renewing our insurance policy? Now, this is a lab environment, so that big bar graph that you see there in the middle, it's a timeline view. Mine's flat. Why? Because it's a lab environment. What you would actually see here, though, ideally over time, is you would see something lower on the left, and over time, as you implement different policies and controls and procedures, you would see your resiliency score going up over time. And that becomes a wonderful illustration that you can show back to your C-level executives, your board of directors, when they say, hey, I gave you X dollars last year to go invest in cybersecurity. How did that help us? You can pull up this dashboard and say, hey, this isn't my opinion. This isn't even Marco and Arctic Wolf's opinion. This is the opinion of all the best cybersecurity frameworks out there in the marketplace today. This is how we stack rank against that. And this is how the investment that you gave to us as an IT organization has improved our resilience and reduced our risk over time. And so it becomes a wonderful visual that you can show back to the company to say, this is how the investments are helping us to improve and reduce risk over time. Again, included in our services. All right, last slide, and then I'll turn it over, Charles and Ben, to you to kind of close us out. I think Ben mentioned this at the top. Cybersecurity is a team sport. None of us have absolutely perfected it. And so the more that we can work together, the more that we can collaborate, the more that we can pull data from other industries and other customers and other sources and put this all into a single place where we're working on it together. That's how we tackle this problem. That's how we reduce that effectiveness gap and close the gap as we look to mature. And it's a combination of you working with Arctic Wolf and Marco together on the security journey and the security partnership. Ben or Charles, anything you want to add here?
Yeah, I'd have a few points that I think are important to share. We mentioned this being a team sport. I think we illustrated that a lot throughout this entire session. That NIST NIST incident response lifecycle being a kind of a key visual aid in that area. When we look at the cyber resilience assessment module, we've got the tool that's unified with our entire approach to kind of bring everything together so that we can work on this collaboratively, and then through our VCSO practice, take some of those recommendations that are identified and actually create the solutions to fill those gaps or align you with the right technology partners and solutions to do so. So it kind of helps us operationalize things overall. A couple of key points I think are worth mentioning here too is that when we look at specifically incident response and the relationship with the cyber insurance provider, I mentioned that earlier on the call, where 5, 6, 7 years ago, the first thing to do always was required to call out to your cyber insurance provider first before you touched anything. And still, the cyber insurance policy itself and the provider will dictate some of how you work with the provider on that end of things. But this type of a mentality, this type of a process, the right tools, the right response plan, oftentimes can catch these things earlier, faster, and then prevents from even filing a claim in the first place. And I think that's a huge thing to just keep our mind on, because this does shift the dynamic a little bit. And think of it a little bit like emergency response. And if you're in an accident on the side of the road, honestly, I'd want to call the paramedics in first to take that action first before I call the insurance provider to authorize that life-saving measure, if I could use an analogy like that. One thing to note, just because this entire conversation was centered around cyber insurance, if you are having a lot of questions around how do I align with the right cyber insurance provider, how do I take the findings of this insurability measurement and align those with the right provider, we do have another partnership with a company called Fifth Wall that actually helps our customers align with the right policy to make sure they're properly insured, not underinsured or overinsured. They've got the right coverage. They've got the right coverage built into that policy for our customers. If you're interested in that, please feel free to reach out to us to learn a little bit more about that. Lastly, I want to say thank you, everyone, for joining us today for the launch of our partnership. I'm sure this has brought about a lot of questions. If you want to dive deeper into these solutions and what the future looks like